So, I was thinking about just kind of all the news of late. There's just so much heavy news, so much troubling news. Just, it's been going on for months. And I would say for me, the past 6 months have been especially hard because there was no football. But thankfully, football is back this weekend. So whatever weighs us down is at least a little bit better now because there's football. And as I've told you guys before, I'm not a sports fan by any stretch of the imagination. I don't watch any sport except football. I don't even watch college football. I just watch pro football. I'm not a stats guy. I'm not into all that stuff. But there's something that I like about professional football. I just like watching it. And, and we've talked about this before, that there are things that when you can watch somebody who does something exceptionally well, that there's something to be gained from that experience of just kind of watching people are good, even if it's not something that you necessarily want to do on your own. And for me, professional football kind of exemplifies that. And of course, living around here in this region, Tom Brady, 44 years old, still killing it as he plays football. So he's one we kind of know well. But there's another guy that you may not know as well from this area. It's a guy named Larry Fitzgerald. Larry Fitzgerald plays for the Phoenix Cardinals. He's played for 17 seasons. Fantastic receiver. But there's something neat about Larry Fitzgerald, is that although he is an incredible football player, he's also an incredible person. Tremendously generous. You never see him in the tabloids. You see in any interaction, he is nothing but polite, defers to the person he's talking to. He is kind of the antithesis of what you expect from a professional athlete, particularly a guy who has played 17 seasons. And every year they say, we'll give you $15 million if you'll play one more season. He's kind of that good. But he hasn't let it go to his head. And as nice as it is to kind of look at an athlete and go, wow, I wish I could be like that or be excited by that, I don't know about for you, but professional football is nowhere in my future. Don't laugh at that. It's not that funny. Come on. I'm in pretty good shape for my age. Come on. Yeah. But, in all seriousness, that professional football, professional sports of any sort, are very unlikely for the overwhelming number of human beings. But it's okay for people to inspire us. And we often look to athletes and things like that to inspire us. But, we're not limited to that. That any of us can live a life that stands out. Any of us can live a life that inspires people. There are people that you know who inspire you. Think about that person that you know, and we have people in this church like this. Think about that person that you know who faces incredible difficulty, yet never seems to waver. That you kind of look at him and go, man, if I was going through that, I don't think I would do as well as they are. But they are. And they maintain their faith. And they maintain their joy. And they maintain their confidence in God. Or think of people who actually enter into vocations or serve at places that are incredibly difficult to work in or to serve in. I think of all the frontline workers in hospitals dealing with so many sick people. And they keep going. And they don't stop because they see their purpose. And they realize that their purpose is more important than how they feel in any moment. That is inspiring. And we can all have that kind of effect. I think that sort of thing is in reach for all of us. Because we can all choose to live our lives in a way that inspires other people, but it means we have to start looking past ourselves. We have to embrace the power of God in our lives, that we have to be willing to say, you know what, I will do the best I can, but to be all I can be, I need more than me. I need God with me. I need to recognize His power in my life. I need to recognize that when Jesus talks about loving others, that it's not a suggestion, that's not sort of. It's like, no, I'm going to actually see that as part of my purpose, is to love in a way that defies understanding. And when we love other people that way, it stands out. And that can begin to inspire people. But it doesn't stop there, because it changes us as well. That when we lean on God like that, it draws us closer to God, and it draws us closer to other people. So what I want to talk about today is the fact that we can all have a significant impact in the lives of people around us. So as we continue our series, Community Matters, I want to talk about creating impact. So remember that in this series, what we're looking at is that what does it mean to be a community church in the 21st century? And as we talked about last week, what it means hasn't changed. It means that we serve our community. Part of that means we have to do some new things. That's why we talked about last week about, not too long away, we'll actually go from one service to two, so we can meet those two distinct worship needs. Go more into a traditional model, as well as having an option to go more into a modern model. So that's the part that's kind of new. But fundamentally, what it means to be a community church, the most important aspect of it is engaging with our community. That is something that has never changed. And so what I want to look at today is that, what does that look for us? How do we have the most impact that we can as a community church? Well, to understand that, the first thing to understand, of course, is what is a church? Is the building the church? Nah, it's just something we use on Sundays or throughout the week. The church is you. Right? The church is the people. And so the most important aspect of being the church is how we as the people do things, how we engage with our community. So what we need to do is realize that, I think we all know this, but I'm going to ask us to internalize this, is that as part of this church, whenever we walk out of here, just like a football player wears a team jersey, and I go, hey, they play for the Patriots, or they play for the Cardinals. When we walk out of here, they're like, hey, aren't they the people who go to that church? And people notice. And people notice what we do. People notice how we act. And when we find ourselves in a difficult situation, people wonder what we're going to do and how we're going to react. So we need to recognize that what we do every day represents the church, and it represents God. And so we need to kind of really embrace that. Because, as I say that, kind of one of the things our minds are tempted to do is kind of go, whoa, I don't want to mess up. I don't want to look bad. But let's turn it around. Why don't we say, I want to stand out. I want to show that there's something different. I want to show that there's a light inside of me that I could not have created on my own. If I let that light shine, just like a little kid, right? Let that little light shine. If I will let that light shine, it can matter. It can have an impact. It can change lives. And I think if enough lives are changed, it changes the community. And it makes things better. The Apostle Peter puts it like this. Be careful to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. Then even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior, and they will give honor to God on the day of visitation. So where it says give honor to God on the day of visitation, if you go to the Bible commentaries, there is some disagreement on what does that mean. What exactly does the day of visitation mean? But although they don't all agree 100% it means this, most of them agree that it likely means this. That it means that there will be a day in the future where God will visit a person's heart. And God will move on their heart. And that person's reaction to God will be at least influenced by their interactions with believers. That the things that we do over time have eternal impact. They can actually change people's lives today, but they can also change their relationship with God, which can change their eternity. And the thing is that what God calls us to do is not to go out and preach at people. Right? It's not to go out and tell people what they're doing wrong. What God calls us to do is to live our lives in such a way that His light inside of us shines through. Basically, what God calls us to do is to honor Him by honoring the people around us. The way we most honor God is by being loving and honoring to others. And the cool thing is that we don't have to be perfect to make a difference. But we do the best we can, we surrender to God as best we can, and He will work through that, and He will move through that. Even though we're going to get it wrong sometimes. It really matters. And to demonstrate the kind of impact that we can have and the scale of our impact by being willing to let God's light shine through us, being willing to live our lives in such a way that we can be a positive representation of what it means to love God and be loved by God and recognize that we're loved by God. I want to look at a book from the New Testament that we probably don't talk about enough. It's Philemon. It's actually pronounced Philemon. Philemon is this little bitty book in the New Testament. You can miss it. Actually, in my Bible, it doesn't even take up 2 pages. It's actually 1 chapter, roughly 25 verses. And it's a letter from the Apostle Paul to a friend of his. And guess what his friend's name is? Philemon. So it's a letter to his friend Philemon. Now, remember that the Apostle Paul is a very standout person in the Bible, that he lived a life that was incredibly centered on God. But by living a life that was centered on God, he lived a life that was centered on caring for and serving other people. That Paul was willing to be different. In Paul's case, faced incredible suffering in order to be willing to be different, to be willing to stand out. And if you look at the life of Paul, Paul did not get it perfect. But he surrendered to God. He did what God called him to do. And he embraced the power of God in his life. And it made an incredible difference. And it shows us in just this one little tiny letter the kind of impact that that can have. Now, Philemon was a first century slave owner. But eventually, he becomes a Christian. Does that mean he sold all of his slaves? Or at least, unfortunately not. He was a wealthy man. But as we'll see, Philemon does change over time. Now, it's important to understand that slavery in the Roman Empire was central to the economy of the Roman Empire. By some estimates, 1/3 of the population of the Roman Empire was slaves. So it was a critical piece of that. And it's also important to understand that slavery in the Roman Empire was different than slavery in the United States. United States slavery was based on the fact that one race considered themselves superior to another race. In the Roman Empire, it was different. You became a slave for a number of reasons. One of the big reasons, you got conquered. Basically, the Roman army comes rolling into the territory or nation or region where you live, and you lose. The cost of losing was that most or all of the people in that region were enslaved. But there was another kind of slave as well, sometimes called a bond servant. A bond servant was someone who agreed to effectively live in slavery for a period of time tied to a debt. Sometimes it was because a family member owed a significant debt, and they would effectively sell a child to pay off that debt. Or another common scenario was that a person who did not have means, who was not wealthy, would make a deal with a person who was wealthy and say that, okay, if you will transport me from where I am to where you are for an agreed upon number of years, I will be a servant, I will be a slave for you. As long as you house me and feed me, I will do work for you for some period of time. And the Roman law actually allowed for all that, and all that was managed under the law. And so there were these different kinds of slaves. And we're actually going to look at another slave here, or another person here, who was a slave, Onesimus. Onesimus was a first century slave. And Onesimus was a slave that had actually run away from Philemon. Now, we don't know for sure, but looking at the letter, it seems that Philemon may have been mistreating him. We don't know that for sure, but there are indications that maybe he was mistreating him. And the thing is that running away as a slave did not mean your problems were over. Because Roman law dealt with escaped slaves very harshly. There was an entire business around capturing escaped slaves. So although Onesimus may have thought that running away will fix things, it probably didn't. So Paul is writing this letter to Philemon. What do you think the subject of the letter is? Onesimus. because Onesimus is with Paul, and that's why Paul is writing this letter. But here's what's kind of funny. We think about it. Onesimus has run away from Philemon, and he's now with Paul. Why does Paul know Philemon? Because they were friends. They were friends. Now, doesn't that seem strange to you? That you would run away from your master and then go be with a friend of your master. That seems like it defies logic. Logic. Because Onesimus should have feared Paul. Because Paul could have actually had Onesimus arrested. Or at a minimum, contacted Philemon and said, hey, that guy you're missing, I know where he is. But for some reason, Onesimus trusted Paul. So that means that even though Paul interacted with his master, Onesimus saw something in Paul's life. He said, this guy's different than the other people. The other people who are friends with my master look down on me, belittle me, call me less. But Paul must not have done that. And so it would seem that not only did Onesimus not fear Paul, but he actually trusted him. He said that I'm in a deep jam. I'm in trouble. This is someone not only do I not have to fear, but this is someone who I can trust. And we know that Onesimus spends a period of time with Paul. And during the time that Onesimus is with Paul, he actually becomes a Jesus follower. He actually develops faith in Jesus. So that alone would be an incredible series of events. That because of Paul's relationship with a slave owner, he's actually led that slave owner to know Jesus, but he has also now led an escaped slave to know Jesus. If that was the end of it, that would be an incredible story. But it turns out that's not the end of it, because there's also something else that's kind of interesting. As Paul writes this letter to Philemon about Onesimus, how do you think the letter gets to Philemon? Paul hands it to Onesimus and says, take it back to him yourself. And that seems cruel. But we have to remember that Onesimus' life as an escaped slave would have been harsh and hard, and he would not have been free. But also, because of other information in the letter, it seems that Onesimus is a slave because of a debt. In other words, there is an agreement in place that he committed to work for Philemon, to be a slave to Philemon for some period of time. So you've made a deal. You need to be willing to walk out the deal that you have made. But Paul doesn't hang Onesimus out to dry. That's why he's writing the letter. He's writing the letter to Philemon to try to convince Philemon of something. So he says this. So this is from Paul's letter. Onesimus is no longer a slave to you. He's more than a slave, for he's a beloved brother, especially to me. Now he will mean much more to you, both as a man and as a brother in the Lord. So first of all, he says to Philemon, you need to stop mistreating him. That you need to respect him. You need to respect him as a human, but you also need to respect him as a brother in Christ. And so you need to change what you're doing there. And then Paul anticipates the fact that Philemon would probably be thinking, but he owes me. I have rights, you know. So Paul anticipates that. So in the letter, Paul continues. So if you consider me your partner, welcome him as you would welcome me. In other words, I'm your brother in the Lord. How would you treat me? I want you to treat him the same way. And if he has wronged you in any way or owes you anything, charge it to me. So if you think you're owed something, if you think you've been wronged, well, guess what? We've all been wronged. We're all owed something. And I have helped you in the past. In fact, Paul goes on to elaborate in tremendous detail how much Paul has helped Philemon in the past. I didn't ask you to pay me anything. I did it for you because I love you. So yes, Onesimus owes you a debt. I'm asking you to forgive it. But if you won't forgive it, let him go anyway and send me the bill. But just remember all the things I did for you. I didn't ask for anything. And I didn't do those things for you so I could hold it over you. I did those things for you because I love you as a brother. Onesimus is your brother. Offer him and extend to him the same release, the same opportunities you would extend to me. Now, Paul's wisdom here, I think, is just incredibly amazing because he's actually led both of these men towards freedom. In the sense that he's created a relationship between them and God, or he certainly played his role in that. No person creates that, but he's led them to have that experience. And then he shows Onesimus that running away from what you owe is not freedom. It's with help and support, facing that thing that is your bondage. And he also shows Philemon that if you want to really be free, recognize that we need to love others more than we worry about what we're owed. We need to release the things that we feel we're owed to. And so Onesimus returns back to Philemon, letter in hand. What happens? We don't actually know. The Bible never tells us. We just have the letter. But we actually have a pretty good indication. Because in church history, there are two church leaders in the first century who become great friends. One's named Philemon. The other one's named Onesimus. They both rose up to be church leaders. If you may know this, that Timothy, who traveled with Paul, Timothy headed the church in Ephesus. Timothy turns the church in Ephesus over to someone named Onesimus. And in fact, Onesimus and Philemon actually stood against the Roman Empire together. So people of those names spent time together, documented through church history. And the belief and understanding is that these two men, where one was master and one was slave, who now stand together as brothers, not just friends, but leading churches and impacting other lives. In fact, Onesimus and Philemon are considered saints by both the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And think about this. What kind of church leaders would they have been, given that experience? How much they had to be transformed to move from master and slave to brothers and leaders. How different would they have been from other church leaders? How much more understanding would they have had? How much more creative about creating relationships and connecting people would they have been versus others? And so that means that these two men's lives who were impacted so closely by Paul would go on to impact so many other lives. But their impact would never have happened had Paul not been who he was. So Paul transformed their lives, and indirectly, Paul transformed the lives of every other person that they touched. And that would carry on for generations, because it creates an entire line of transformation that never would have happened had Paul not lived in a way that stands out like that. Had Paul not lived in a way that showed that he was so different than other people. And the thing we have to remember is that as we read things like this from our Bibles, we go, yeah, well, that's a first century thing. Or, yeah, that's Paul. Paul's just different. And Paul is different. There's, in a lot of ways, Paul is different. But the sort of things we see Paul do is available to all of us. And that's the thing we have to embrace, that there's a simple reality that the way we live our lives matters. And we don't do that out of fear. We don't do that because we're afraid someone's going to talk about us. We don't do that because we want to show someone up. What we want to recognize is that in our relationship with Jesus Christ, there was a tremendous debt paid for us out of love. And when we walk in that love in our lives, and we are willing to be that way with people around us, just to be open-hearted, open-handed, and giving, it has an impact and it stands out. And so the most important thing that we can do, that any church can do as a community church, is for the church. In fact, Peter often refers to the people in the church as the blocks or the bricks of the church. For the blocks of the church to head out and share that love, to share that share that mindset. That is more important than anything else we can do. That if we will treat others that way, and we will interact that way, and we will move through our community in that way, that begins to transform lives. It transform the lives of those people you interact with directly, and in turn will transform the lives of anyone else that they interact with. So what I'm going to ask us all to do in the week ahead is just take a couple minutes and reflect on a moment when you weren't quite who you wanted to be. That you had an interaction with someone, and maybe you lost your temper. And you let your temper get away from you a little bit. Or maybe you could have been nicer or more helpful. Maybe there was that cashier who was just being so darn dense, I can't stand it. Why couldn't they understand? And you lost your composure, we'll say, with them. Or maybe there was a time where you got very focused on what you should get instead of what you could give. And as you reflect on it, what I do not want you to do is feel guilty about it. That's not what I'm asking anybody to do. Guilt just weighs us down. We don't need to feel guilty. What I'm going to ask us to do is reflect on and go, what do I wish I would have done? What could I have done to look more like Paul did when Onesimus saw him? How could I have treated this person differently? How could I have dealt with that situation differently? And then I want us to kind of meditate on what that positive version of the situation looks like and keep it front of mind. So that way the next time it happens, or at least the opportunity for it to happen like it did last time, because it will come up again, have that front of mind. And in that time and next time, do it that way instead. Do it that positive way. Don't focus on what we're owed. Instead, focus on what we can give. Don't focus on the fact that they're wrong. Embrace patience and calm. And just try to do it that one time. And then try to do it another time. And over time, that will make all the difference. That will change your life. It will change the lives of every person you interact with. So that, I believe, my friends, is more important than anything else we can do as a community church in this community.